We have to let you go.
You're fired. 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 You're fired.
Why?
Because the economy's on the downturn right now, and we can't afford to keep you on board. Sorry.
Now that I'm unemployed, let's ask some homeless people what they think. Are you unemployed?
Yeah, I'm unemployed.
Why?
Well, I'm seasonally unemployed. You know, I used to sell t-shirts and summer wear, but now it's winter and I don't have anybody to sell to.
How about you?
I'm frictionally unemployed. I graduated college, but I missed my job interview because I was at a party.
What about you?
I'm structurally unemployed. I used to play soccer, but my coach thinks I suck, so I can't play anymore. I don't have the skills.
Loser.
Sad.
So there are four main types of unemployment: cyclical, seasonal, frictional, structural. So in our little skit, Andy was unemployed. That means she lost her job due to a downturn in the economy through no fault of her own. Jude was seasonally unemployed. This means that the job he was performing is not applicable at this time of year, therefore he's unemployed during this time of year. Frictional means like you're in between jobs. So in our skit, Zach was right out of college, so he didn't have a job yet, but he's going to get one in the future, so he's in between jobs or frictionally unemployed. And I was structurally unemployed, which means that I didn't have the skills to perform my job anymore, therefore I was fired.
All right, now we're going to talk about the labor force. Who's in it, who's not in it, and then how to calculate the unemployment rate. So right now we have a bunch of statistics up here. We have some country, and the population is 1,500,000 are 16 or older, 100,000 retired, 100,000 discouraged, 50,000 underemployed, and 20,000 unemployed. So these are a lot of different categories of people, and we want to try to get the unemployment rate from this. So let's talk about what each of these things mean. In order to be a part of the labor force, you have to be 16 and older, and either working or looking for a job. So we're going to be dealing with this statistic for sure. Retired people aren't counted in the labor force, so we don't need to worry about them in terms of calculating unemployment. Same with discouraged workers. Discouraged workers are people who have been unemployed for a while and they've stopped looking for a job. So since they're not looking, they're not in the labor force. Underemployed people are people employed below their skill level. So if you have a PhD and you're working at McDonald's, you're underemployed, but you still have a job, so you're not counted as unemployed. And then finally, actual unemployment is right here, 20,000. In order to calculate the unemployment rate, you got to do the number unemployed times the total number in the labor force times 100. So let's say that all these 16-year-olds are working or looking. And then here's unemployed, 20,000. So what's the total number in the labor force? Well, there's all these 16-year-olds, and then on top of that, there's these people unemployed there in the labor force as well. So let's add 500,000 and 20,000. That's 520,000. And then you divide 20,000 by that total, 520,000. And then you multiply by 100. That's your unemployment rate. And that's going to be a little under 4%, which is the solid unemployment rate.
Alright, so this is the Phillips curve, and it shows the relationship between inflation rate and unemployment rate. And this shows that inflation and unemployment have an inverse relationship, and that when inflation is high, the unemployment rate of this economy will be lower, and when the unemployment rate increases, the inflation rate will go down. And this graph is at long-run equilibrium and is at the natural rate of unemployment, and long-run Phillips curve is similar to the long-run aggregate supply on an ADAS model. Alright, the reason unemployment rate and inflation rate have an inverse relationship is because when there's a low unemployment rate, there will be more employed people, causing the income to go up, which will then cause more spending in the economy, which will then make the inflation rate go up. But when there's a high unemployment rate, there will be less income for the spenders, and they'll not be able to spend as much, which will then cause the inflation rate to lower.
Alright, so as you guys know, this is an aggregate demand and aggregate supply graph, and right now this economy is at long-run equilibrium, which means that aggregate supply, aggregate demand, and long-run aggregate supply all intersect, and that's where the economy is. And if you'll notice, over here we have price level, and this is the price level that the economy is currently at. And this is the level of output that we're currently at. Of course, real GDP on this axis. And they use Y to represent output most of the time. And this is Y1 because it's where the economy is, but it's also YF. And that represents the output at full employment. That's what that F is. And that means that we are around the natural rate of unemployment, which means that currently there's no cyclical unemployment in this economy.
Okay, NRU stands for natural rate of unemployment, and it's typically 4 to 5%. It's not 0% because even though there's no cyclical unemployment, there's still going to be structural and seasonal and frictional. And it's also known as full employment because the economy is operating at equilibrium.
All right, so let's talk about the spot we just did. So we had groups and they were making product, right? And initially, everybody was employed and there's no motivation to try to keep your job. You didn't have to try to outperform anybody else. So production was low. But then when people had to compete to keep their job, because there was a group waiting to take their job, they had to produce as fast as they could and be as efficient as possible in order to maximize their output and stay employed. And this represents why it's good for an economy to have some unemployment. Obviously, we don't want cyclical, but if the unemployment rate were to be 0, it'd be a problem. It'd almost be like being in an economy and society where everybody has a job and there's no motivation to do well, and that'll decrease productivity. However, when you have some unemployment, people are competing for their job. So structural, frictional, and seasonal unemployment are actually good because they motivate people to increase their skills, do a better job at what they do in order to maximize output.
Okay, now we're doing costs of unemployment. So there can either be economic or social costs to having a high unemployment rate, aside from the fact that people don't have a job. And so in economic costs, there is going to be a decreased disposable income because as consumers have obviously less income if they're unemployed, they're not going to spend as much in the economy. There's also decreased productivity. Of course, as firms can't hire as many workers, there's going to be less output. There's also a higher interest rate, which means less investment because during a recession, typically a high interest rate occurs, and there's going to be less government revenue as taxes typically decrease in fiscal policy in order to correct a recession. And then under social costs, we have increased crime because as people can't afford as many goods, some might turn to stealing them. There's also more expensive housing, typically in a recession, and the poverty cycle. Typically more people are put into the poverty cycle because as they don't have a job, they have less income and can't afford higher education, and so their children are going to probably be born into a similar financial state. And then standard of living decreases as people can't afford as expensive housing or really the same luxuries that they did when they had a job. Also, happiness typically decreases because people don't have a job, they're not happy, and they can't afford as many things.
Guys, our money problems are over. We're officially on welfare. Come on, kids, help me scatter car parts on the front lawn.
How much are we getting?
Let's see, $150 a week.
In that family life clip we just saw, Peter is on welfare now. He's making $150 a week. However, beforehand, he's making $1,000 a week. So we can assume that he lost his job due to cyclical unemployment. The economy was in a downturn. He lost his job through no fault of his own. So his welfare check was only a proportion of his actual income. Therefore, it keeps him afloat and his family afloat. However, it does encourage him to seek a job with better pay.
One more type of unemployment is hidden unemployment, and this doesn't show up in the unemployment rate, which is for the economy. And one example of it is underemployed workers who are working at a job but it's below their skill set, such as a person who graduated college with a doctor's degree. If they're working at McDonald's, they'd be considered unemployed, but they wouldn't factor into the unemployment rate. And then discouraged workers are people who are without a job, and they've been without a job for so long that they've stopped searching for a job. So that although they don't have a job, they're not considered unemployed when calculating the unemployment rate. And then part-time workers who want to be full-time workers are part of hidden unemployment because they haven't reached their goal of being fully employed yet at a full-time job, but a part-time job is better than no job at all for them.
Alright, so this is a quick recap. There's 4 types of unemployment: cyclical, frictional, seasonal, and structural. Cyclical unemployment is also known as disequilibrium unemployment, and the other 3 are known as equilibrium unemployment, because cyclical is when the economy is in a downturn, so it kind of makes sense. To calculate the unemployment rate, you take the number of people looking for work, divide by the labor force, and that's the unemployment rate. Full employment is between 4 and 5%. You can't have 0% unemployment, as explained earlier. The Phillips curve is corresponding with the ADAS model. If the LRPC shifts, if the LRAS shifts, the LRPC shifts in the opposite direction. If there's a shift in demand, then there's a movement along the curve in the opposite direction. And if aggregate supply shifts, then the entire short run Phillips curve will shift in the opposite direction. Unemployment benefits are when you lose your job through no fault of your own, and the government helps you out for a certain period of time with a small percentage of what you used to make in order to keep you on your feet and help you until you find another job. And there are social and economic costs of unemployment, which is not desirable in an economy.
I'm no longer seasonally unemployed because now that it's winter, I sell these coats.
I'm no longer frictionally unemployed now. I finally got a job.
Where are you working?
McDonald's.
Nice.
Now that I can't play soccer, I'll play ping pong instead.
Thankfully, the economy recovered and I was hired back, but luckily not for the government, which is currently shut down.